This Irish folk story takes place in the Slieve Bloom, which happens to be one of the oldest mountain ranges in all of Europe. Now, Finn McConnell learned everything that he knows about hunting from the women of the Slieve Bloom. So it's not surprising that we find him hunting there many years later. It just so happens that Finn McConnell is the leader of a legendary band of warriors called the Fianna. Now, the Fianna were known all over Ireland. They were a lot like the rock stars and the footballers of our day. On one particular occasion, Finn was hunting in those mountains with his companions, Conan, Oscar, Diarmid, and Oisin. And they'd stayed too long, and they needed a place to rest overnight. And they saw in the distance a house with a light on, and so they made their way to that particular dwelling. And Finn knocked on the door, and answering the door on the other side was an old man with ancient eyes and a long white beard. And as soon as he saw who his visitors were, he had this great, big, effusive smile on his face, and he said, "Finn McConnell, what an honor. You and your men are welcome here. Please come in." And Finn looked at him and said, "You know us?" And he said, "Indeed I do. The Fianna are famous in all of Ireland. We know of your stories. We know of your skill and your courage. It is an honor to have you in our household." So Finn and his companions entered the house. And when they came in, they saw a nice warm fire off to the left. And there was a large wooden table with chairs for them to sit in. Tethered in the corner of the room was a lamb. And next to the lamb, sitting in a chair, was the most beautiful maiden any of those men had ever seen. And at her feet, a black cat. The old man asked, "Will you be having something to eat?" And Finn said, "Indeed, and we thank you, sir." And the old man gestured to the maiden to prepare some food. But at that moment, the lamb escaped from the corner with its tether and leaped up onto the table. Now, Oscar was already pretty enamored with the maiden, and he wanted to impress her, so he decided he was going to make the first move. And he leaped up on that table and put his arms around to secure that lamb, only to find himself thrown across the room onto his backside. Now, the other gentleman also wanted to impress the maiden, and in turn, each of them went to the table. Oisin went up there only to be butted off the table immediately. And then the other gentleman leaped up there, Diarmid and Conan, and they were butted onto the floor and couldn't do anything about it. And of course, Finn McConnell was watching all this, and he said to himself, "Well, I guess I should have a go now." But as soon as he was on the table, a mere nudge from that lamb, and he was on the floor. And he looked up at the old man and he said, "That's some lamb that you've got." But at that point, the cat gently walked up to the top of the table, lifted the tether along the lamb's neck, and softly, quietly led the lamb back to the corner, to everyone's astonishment. But then the food was ready, and the meal was great, and everyone gorged themselves, and the men were ready for rest. And so the old man took Finn and his men to another room in the house. where there were plenty of beds, enough for every man to have a place of his own to sleep. And so they settled in, and after a few minutes they were wanting to go to sleep, but the door of the room opened. And stepping into the room was the maiden with a candle. And she walked quietly and softly across the room to a window where there was another bed. And she got under the blanket and she blew out the candle. Now I can look at my audience. Here, and I can tell that some of you think this is a Farmer Brown joke. But the old man did not have any requirements or any rules. Thank you. Any requirements or any rules with respect to the maiden and those Irishmen. But I can tell you something else. None of those men could sleep. They all pretended to sleep. Yes. And then at some point, this really phony snoring sound occurred. And Oscar got out of bed. And he walked quietly over to the maiden. And as he approached her, she opened her eyes. And she smiled at him. And he smiled back. And she said, "Oscar, you had me once, and you didn't give me much thought, and you will never have me again." Oscar turned and retreated back to his bed, disheartened. Oisin made a go of it. He went over to the maiden's bed and got exactly the same message and returned to his bed, disheartened, followed by both of the other gentlemen or companions. They went over there. They were met with the same message. They retreated to their beds, each man wondering what the maiden had said to the others. But you should know that Finn McConnell, he knew exactly what was taking place in that room. And he thought to himself, well, I'm the leader of the Fianna. The maiden will surely be impressed with me. And he lifted himself out of bed and walked confidently across that room. And as he did, the maiden opened her eyes and she smiled, and he smiled back, and she said, "Finn McConnell, I was once yours, and you didn't give me much thought, and you will never have me again." And Finn, like the others, turned and retreated to his bed. But he thought to himself, I've been with a lot of women in my life, and I think I remember them all. But I don't recognize this maiden. I don't recall her. The next morning, as the men were preparing to leave, Finn was thanking the old man. "I appreciate your hospitality. It was wonderful for you to invite us into your home, but you should know this is a strange house. That lamb, it was so strong, none of us could subdue it. And yet the cat, so much weaker, was able to lift it like a feather and take it back to the corner." And the old man looked at Finn and he said, "Well, that lamb is life. And life, has a will of its own. As for the cat is death. And death controls life." Finn looked at the old man. "What of the maiden? She seems to have known all of us, but we don't recognize her, we don't recall her." And the old man said, "The maiden is youth. She was yours once. She belonged to all of you, but you did not give her much thought. You were careless, and you will never have her again." And finally, as he was stepping out the door, Finn looked at the old man and said, And who are you? And the old man smiled, and he said, my name is Time, and I have power over life and death, and most certainly youth. Thank you.